All right, so I mentioned I'm Kyree Holmes. I work at Comcast, but I also wanted to let you know that I also started an organization called Onyx Valley. That's to get minorities, people of color, people of underrepresented groups involved in the user experience field. So if you're interested, you can follow me at Onyx_Valley. I mentioned I'm a researcher at Comcast. I focus mostly on qualitative research. I do a lot of participatory design, concept testing, and I work namely with the voice remote control. And that also includes the voice UI, what you see on screen, as well as the hardware, the physical voice remote, and the packaging too. And if you're not familiar with Comcast, there's just a little video loop here I have for you just to show what goes on. You basically have this UI here. It's pretty nice and clean, simple. You can go in through the guide, search for what you want. You can even customize the guide. We have a lot of people who use the text to type feature, but we do have the voice search as well, so we try to accommodate people who aren't so into voice as well. And it's just a really cool product. If it's available in your area, definitely check it out. All right, so the voice remote, we actually have 20 million active voice remotes out in the field today. We've received over 6 billion voice commands in 2017, and that growth is just going exponentially over each month. So we're really proud of that people are using the product, they like it, and they're having some fun with it. But I do want to talk about some of the barriers to adoption. Adoption of technology is spreading faster today, but a lot of times the things I hear about voice, I'm not going to say they're inflated, but you'll hear 20% of people have a smart speaker in their home, but that also means 80% of people do not. So I really want to talk about some of the things that I've been finding out at Comcast with voice control, as well as challenges that we see throughout the industry and how we can address those. So I mentioned adoption and how it's spreading a little differently today. So I found this really cool graph here. There's a data visualization artist named Nicholas Felton. He does a lot of things for New York Times. And he has this chart here I thought was interesting that he shows us different technologies and appliances, things that were introduced in America and how fast they were actually adopted. And you can see some of these curves are steeper than others. And I'm going to zoom in on a couple in just a second here. So if you look at the telephone, you can see it took, almost 100 years for telephones to reach almost 100% penetration. And then you have the cell phone, which was introduced just in the late 80s, and that makes nearly an 80% adoption rate by 2005. So that curve is much steeper, which is a good thing, right? But then as I was looking at this graph, I saw something that was a little disappointing, the dishwasher. How many people here have a dishwasher in their home? Okay, oh, a lot of you guys. How many of you use your dishwasher once a week? Less hands, okay. How many use it every day? Ooh, even fewer, okay. So the dishwasher, I thought it was really interesting that this is a technology that's been around for over 50 years and it's barely making 60% penetration. So why is that? And it started making me think about voice control technology too. I just mentioned, only 20% of people have smart speakers, and I don't want it to end up like the dishwasher. So there's a lot we can learn from the dishwasher. Just from that show of hands, you can see people have it and they're not using it. We notice the same thing when we're talking to people about using voice products. They say we have it, but we don't really use it or we don't use it that often. And even the dishwasher here, you can see a dramatic difference here between the number of people who have it and don't use it compared to a lot of the other technologies up there. And just like voice, dishwashers have a lot of different uses that people just aren't really aware of. I did some research and I found out with your dishwasher, you can actually use it to warm plates. I have a chef friend and he says that's actually a useful feature because if you're serving a really cold dish, it's nice to have a warm plate to warm it up. I don't really get it, but okay. Sanitizing children's toys. If you have kids who are playing out in dirt, you can throw the toys into the dishwasher. It's good to go. And then a really interesting thing I saw, if you look on YouTube, there are a lot of people who are making Thanksgiving turkeys in their dishwasher. I don't know exactly how they turned out. None of them I saw were actually eating the turkeys, but they said you can cook them and you can poach salmon as well. And shinier hubcaps, that actually seemed pretty useful to me, but I'm not sure I want to put my dishes in there after I put my hubcaps. But that's just to say that there are lots of different uses for a dishwasher, and with voice, there are dozens of features we have with the voice remote. But the predominant uses that we see people or hear people tell us about is I use it for title search and I use it for channel tune. So I'm using it to say, show me Game of Thrones or turn to ESPN, and that's about it. And there's so much more you can do. We're investing in making all these features, so I really want people to start using them. All right, so I wanted to talk about 4 of the challenges I've noticed as to why people aren't using them and some of the ways that we're trying to solve for them at Comcast. All right, so the first challenge is that voice is not at the top of the mind. A lot of people, when I have them, we actually have a usability lab set up at Comcast to look like a living room so people can feel comfortable, and we'll have a TV and say, watch TV for us, and we'll watch you watch TV. And I'll see them do a task, and after they do it, they'll say, you know what, it would have probably been a lot faster if I did that with the voice remote. And I'm like, well, why didn't you? And they're like, I wasn't really thinking about it. So voice is just not a top-of-the-mind technology. There are a lot of habits that people have already formed. I have this picture here because it just kind of illustrates that idea. Here's a guy who has all this technology in his car, and then he pulls out his phone to do something that he can probably do with the in-car technology. But because the phone is convenient, he's used to it, it's a habit, that's what he's going to use. So I wanted to point out something that we're doing on the hardware side at Comcast to make voice first when people think of their experience watching TV. If you see on the left, that's the first generation of the voice remote that was released in 2015. And on the right, that's the second generation of the voice remote. And we made a few changes and adjustments to make it voice first. So an opportunity here we saw was just to remove some of the barriers and design for voice first with our hardware. So if you notice, the old remote, we had a very small voice button. You can see it right up there, that little tiny blue microphone. It wasn't its own button. It sat in the same row as 2 other buttons. In our new remote, we actually give the voice button its own individual button right there in the center at the bottom. It has a different texture. It's also the largest button on the remote control, and we locate it somewhere that we call the thumb zone. So if you're actually holding the remote control in a traditional manner, your thumb should go right onto that voice button. It also illuminates. It has a different texture, and it just made so that way if you're holding a remote control, it's very easy for you to use it even at nighttime. So that's just one instance where we decided to take the hardware approach to improve to elevate voice. The second challenge, non-voice interactions are still more efficient for some tasks. So we do notice and we recognize that using voice isn't always the best way, the easiest way, or the fastest way to do something, and that's totally fine. But we should still be definitely designing to make it as easy as possible to use voice, even if the better way or the preferred way to our customers is to use buttons or something else. And we've noticed this same pattern in a lot of studies we've done, is just that people have these very well-worn paths. You can see here this picture. I really like it because it has this big field, and where are you going to go if you're walking down this field? You're going to take that well-worn path, aren't you? You're not going to walk through those weeds. So sometimes that's what it's like when you're using voice. So just to illustrate this a little bit, we kind of came up with this mental model of what goes on when you're using the voice remote. So the first thing you have to do is obviously press that button, hold it down to activate the voice remote. Then you have to think of what you need to say, like record Teen Mom 2. After you say that, then you need to wait for the system to respond to it, and hopefully you said it right and it understood you. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through that loop again. So this is where that cognitive load comes in there, and people go to that well-worn path. That's the buttons. So I know if I want to see Teen Mom 2, I can just go to On Demand, MTV, Teen Mom 2. And it's something I can do very mindlessly, and it'll definitely work every time. Whereas with voice, if I'm mumbling or if I don't project enough, or maybe I didn't change the batteries, your voice remote doesn't work as well if you don't change your batteries often either. That's just a tip. So sometimes that is the best way for people to do it. So we recognize an opportunity that we can still, if there's a case where using the buttons is better, we should still do things to make voice as optimal as possible, even if buttons are also a good way to do it. So I use this example here of tiny houses. If anyone here is not familiar with tiny houses, there are this isn't even all of them. There are probably like 8 or 9 different versions of tiny houses. There's Tiny House Hunters, Tiny House Nation, Tiny House Big Living. It's a really cool show if you like tiny houses. But the point of that is that if you have a voice remote control, you can say tiny houses and you'll get all the different versions of tiny houses and you can pick from here. Whereas if I'm using buttons, I can still get to tiny houses, but then I have to remember which tiny house do I want to see. So this is an instance where through the UI, we're giving people a better chance of finding what they want rather than with buttons, which is also successful, but taking care of some of that cognitive load. The third challenge, people don't know what their voice control devices can do. We hear a lot of people talk about things that they wish they can do with voice or they want to do with voice, and you can actually do them with voice. So one of my participants, Mike, he was talking about a movie he liked. And we were in our session. I said, could you show me the movie? And he says, oh, there's this really great scene. And he starts pressing fast forward. And he's like, oh, it's taking so long to get to this scene, and I want to show it to you. I wish there were a way that I can just say, like, fast forward to the last 5 minutes of the movie. There is, but Mike just didn't know about it. So this is just a picture of our UI here. If you're fast forwarding, and you do have the option to fast forward in increments like ×2, ×3, ×4, and then lightning speed. So again, with buttons, we're also solving for things, but with voice, we can solve by letting you say fast forward 55 minutes or so. So one of the things we can do is just offer some guidance along the way and give people a chance to understand what's going on with a lesson, if you will. So I just have this really quick video here I want to show you where they actually do demonstrate that fast forward feature. I don't know if that was
I missed you. This is the hardest day of my life. Rewind 4 minutes.
Think he's too old for me?
Yep. Fast forward 3 minutes and 32 seconds.
Restart this program.
Ultimate control with the sound of your voice with Xfinity.
So that was just a really cool way for us to use advertising as a teaching opportunity to show people what they can do with voice. And we've actually had participants come in after these commercials have aired and they'll say, oh, I saw something on TV where someone did say fast forward 5 minutes and it actually did it. So again, just taking advantage of it rather than advertising things that are more Comcast related. We just want to teach you how to use our products. And the fourth challenge, people don't know how to phrase their commands. We have a lot of people who come in and they get a little nervous and anxious about talking to machines. I've even heard people say, I don't know what it'll think of me, it'll judge me. So they really do get really upset about talking with machines if they're not comfortable with it. So we prepare for voice behavior differences. And by that I mean we accept commands that are different, phrased in different ways. So we'll have some people who will say, watch Game of Thrones, and then some people say, put on Game of Thrones, and then some people say, would you please put on Game of Thrones for me so I can watch it? So we try to accommodate for people who speak in different ways. If it's a really robotic command language and they want to talk to a machine like a machine, we can appreciate that. And if you want to be polite and talk to it like a person, we can accept that as well. And that's something that you don't see on a lot of other voice technologies. They kind of do just limit you to that command language, but we wanted to give people that option and also make them feel more comfortable because they'll recognize I can say this in a different way and it'll still understand me. Another thing with teaching and opportunities for learning, we have a screensaver that comes up. So if you're using X1 or TV platform and you pause or you leave your TV idle for a while, you actually get a couple of these screensavers like this that give you tips and tricks of how to talk to your remote control. And I can say, like, hands down, pretty much all of the people I interview, they'll say they learn things from this. They wait for this as a teaching opportunity. It makes them feel more comfortable speaking to voice because we even use a colloquialism, like, what can I say? Just make it really comfortable and greeting for people. All right. So just to recap, the 4 challenges to voice adoption. People don't know what their voice control devices can do. Voice is not at the top of their mind. Non-voice interactions are still more efficient for some tasks, and people don't know how to phrase their commands. But I mentioned a couple of ways that you can solve for this, whether it's teaching opportunities, accommodating different speech patterns, or just making voice more fun and easier for people to use. All those are things you can do to get people to start using voice more often. So how do we save voice from the dishwasher's fate? Just thinking about this a little further, what we're doing at Comcast is just trying to get those very basic tasks right. Like we can try to say, use your voice remote to order a pizza, but do you really need a pizza? You're just watching TV. We just want you to be able to find the programs that you like to watch, know when they're on, know when there are new episodes, just taking care of your very basic needs and working really hard to make those work. Taking advantage of opportunities for teachable moments. So we talk a lot about at Comcast, if you're doing something in the middle of a task, is there a way for us to tell you that there's a way to do it better with voice? For example, our friend Mike, who wants to fast forward to the end, could we put something up on the screen if we notice that he's fast forwarding for a long time? Like, is there a certain point you want to get to? There's also technology out there, if you use the voice remote for certain TV shows, you can actually describe what you're looking for. It works really well with Seinfeld. You can say, show me the one where they're planning the Festivus party, and it'll actually find you that episode. So you can actually just talk about what you want and what the episode looks like, and the voice remote will be able to find it for you. And finally, just keeping the experience fresh and rewarding. We're constantly adding new features, giving people new things that they can do with voice, and making it accept more commands. So our team works really hard on the back end with the logs. So if you're saying something in a certain way that we don't support, if we see that enough times, then we know this is a voice command we need to add in because people talk this way. All right, so that's all I had for you today, and I just thought it was fitting to use this picture of me when we had the voice at our office. They actually do a lot of crazy stuff like this. So they had the chair here, and you can take a picture and pretend like you're on the show. Thank you. Question?
When you talk about natural language and teaching opportunities and being able to figure out what a client is looking for by them describing it, how do you work through those different situations? Because you have a lot of clients with different backgrounds and they use different language. So how do you work through all those different instances? Is it machine learning?
Yeah, that is a really hard problem to solve for. And we have tons of data, and there's a team that we actually have that's going through that data, and they're figuring out different ways to use it and figuring out what are things people are saying. So they actually work really hard to keep on adding. They're constantly adding to that list. It's going to take some time, but we have all the data. It's just a matter of getting it into X1. Thank you. Thanks.
So how is Comcast working to overcome the ecosystem in the home that has perhaps multiple voice interfaces? So you've got your remote with its own remote control. There may be a smart speaker in the home with an Alexa or an Assistant platform, and then the TV itself might have an embedded voice capability. So in this use case alone, there's 3 potential voice entry points, not to mention the Alexa Cube thing that was announced a few weeks ago and whatever home control. So, I mean, what do you do when the consumer just says out loud, tune to ESPN? How do you manage all those different options?
What's unique with ours is that we do have a push-button remote control. Of course, after the Fire TV Cube came out, we did look into it. We actually set up one to talk about it and see what they're doing differently. Our customers tell us that they're more comfortable with the push-button remote control because they have a lot of them have privacy issues, and you have to think about the person who's watching Comcast cable may not be the same person who's using Alexa products. They may not be that fast forward in tech. So in a way, us having that push button remote control works, and we don't need to use a guard word. You can just talk into it and you know that it's talking to you. We do have a lot of conversations about phrasing commands because you do, to a certain extent, have to phrase a command differently for Google Home than you do for Alexa. And we want to be cognizant of that, but at the same time, we're really trying to give people freedom to say what they want. Just in my own experience, I have those products at home, and I know sometimes I have to alter my speech, and it's a little uncomfortable because I can say one thing to Alexa and one thing to Google Home, and you get kind of frustrated that they're not speaking the same language. So we do have conversations like, is there a baseline command that we should use for certain things if everyone else is doing it that way? So we do a lot of research to understand the ecosystem. And right now, I don't think anyone is quite the authority on it, which is a good thing for us as we continue to learn and figure out how to solve that. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.